Putin felt like he has lost control over Ukraine because, in my opinion, every other president that was in Ukraine before Poroshenko were puppets of Putin.
How did you get involved with helping Ukraine essentially after the 2014 Crimea invasion? Obviously, you were not in this field before. You're not a political analyst. You had nothing to do with this. So what led to the setup of Hope for Ukraine coming from entertainment industry?
I was in the entertainment industry, developing reality shows and pitching them to different networks, running around, and that was not on my mind. But all the time I was always donating and volunteering to different causes around Ukraine, even prior starting Hope for Ukraine, right? But I wanted to start an organization that I know exactly where my money goes. So that was the reason when Hope for Ukraine was started by me, and then my brother came along, and we built a lot of connections in Ukraine with different volunteering groups, and that's how we start working on the ground in Ukraine, helping those folks who flee the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and Hope for Ukraine started in 2016.
So what is happening? Why is Hope for Ukraine not seeing $100 million of that $75 billion?
Because only about 10% goes to Ukraine and 90% stays in United States. 10% should be labeled as aid package to Ukraine. The other should be labeled as a stimulus package for defense industry of the United States of America.
Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiat. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can all help. My guest today is Yuriy Boyechko. Born in 1982, his father was a Protestant bishop at a time when Ukraine was still a part of the Soviet Union. Yuriy and his family faced incredible hardships, especially early on in his life when he was 4, and his father was jailed for 2 years for practicing religion, something that most of us would find shocking today. Yuriy recalls his father leaving the state prison with a shaved head and completely exhausted. He was only 6 years old at the time. And since that incident, he's never wanted to live in a country where discrimination and oppression rules. Joy entered Yuriy's life in 1991 when Ukraine declared independence from the Soviet Union. To this day, Yuriy says it remains the happiest day of his life. Yuriy moved to the US for higher education and graduated in 2005 from Regent University with an MA in media communications, after which he spent many years working in media and in the entertainment industry. And in 2016, a couple of years after the beginning of the problems in Ukraine, he founded Hope for Ukraine. The purpose: to raise awareness for the unheard voices in Ukraine, especially children affected by HIV and AIDS, a humanitarian cause essentially. Providing medical care for children with disabilities, as well as food and clothing for families that live in extreme poverty, became a lifetime commitment for Yuriy and his wife, Tatyana. So, Yuriy, welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I am happy to host you here with your amazing story. And I want to start with understanding, and I think the audience would want to know, how did you get involved with helping Ukraine essentially after the 2014 Crimea invasion? And obviously, you were not in this field before. You're not a political analyst. You had nothing to do with this. So what led to the setup of Hope for Ukraine coming from entertainment industry?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ali. And 2014 is when annexation of Crimea and part of Donbas region took place. So Ukraine has been independent since 1991, and there were international borders that were set, and every country recognized the borders that were approved by UN and all the other countries around the world. And then in 1991, in 2014, Putin decided to invade and annex Crimea and part of Donbass region. And the reason why it happened because a revolution took place in Ukraine, and Poroshenko, who is, I believe, first free president of Ukraine, came to power. So Putin felt like he has lost control over Ukraine because, in my opinion, every other president that was in Ukraine before Poroshenko were puppets of Putin. That's why there was never an armed conflict until then, because he could control whatever he wanted, they would do it for him. And if you look on his history, Russian's history, their history was all the way from the 1991. They wanted to destroy Ukraine, because if you look at the arms that Ukraine had after it became independent country, they had a lot of weapons in Ukraine. First of all, they got rid of nuclear weapons. The U.S. and Britain said they're going to defend Ukraine, but that's just a piece of paper. Then every president, starting from Kravchuk, Kuchma, Yanukovych, Yushchenko, they were giving away all the weapons that Ukraine had. I'm talking about tanks, planes, missiles, to Russia to pay for gas that was coming to Ukraine, right? So the Putin made a smart deal with them, saying, "Hey, don't give me money, give me the weapons," because his long-term plan was to occupy and come to the point where we are right now and move more further to the west. So when the revolution came and all those old days of Putin, when he could run freely in Ukraine, have been over, then he moved in with power, annexed Crimea, who was part of Ukrainian international borders, and Donbass since 1991. And they annexed that. So at that time, we saw the first wave of refugees, internally displaced folks, who start fleeing those parts. And then a lot of them came west to the town where I'm from, originally Lviv. And, then they need help. They need help with finding a place to live, emergency, response, any type of clothing, whatever, food. And so that's where I wanted to step in, and I wanted to help on more meaningful way. And that's how Hope for Ukraine started. And the reason why I started that, because, I was in the entertainment industry, developing reality shows and pitching them to different networks, running around, and that was not on my mind. But all the time I was always donating and volunteering to different causes around Ukraine, even prior starting Hope for Ukraine, right? But I wanted to start an organization that I know exactly where my money goes. So I know, okay, I'm going to give $1,000, let's say, and then I know that 90% or more of that will go exactly to the family that need, for example, housing or food or medical support. So that was the reason when Hope for Ukraine was started by me, and then my brother came along, and we built a lot of connections in Ukraine with different volunteering groups, and that's how we start working on the ground in Ukraine, helping those folks who flee the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and Hope for Ukraine started in 2016.
Okay. And obviously, the humanitarian aid, because you touched on that, on the ground today is very different to when, full-scale war started. I believe it was in 2022. So I remember when, the big invasion happened, so to speak. Everybody was rushing to support and be a part of, what can we do, essentially. And today, the situation in Lebanon is kind of reminding me of the first days of Ukraine, because I see now that Israel and Hezbollah's conflict in Lebanon is happening, everybody's rushing to the situation with humanitarian aid and everything. But I don't know how long it'll last. I mean, if Israel and Hezbollah fight for another 6 months, are people going to be concerned after the third or fourth month? It's kind of like unfortunate, but it's kind of like fashion, so to speak. How's it going from, like, you're the expert here. How's it going from 2022 to today when it comes to Ukraine? What's happening on the ground?
So in 2022, everybody was raising money for Ukraine, even the nonprofits who never even been on the ground in Ukraine, right? So because that was the media cycle, there was a lot of coverage in the news, and the stories, the pictures is move people, move organizations, and when you're talking about these multinational big nonprofit corporations, they always move where the news cycle is. So at that time, the news cycle was in Ukraine, so everybody was there on the ground, and of course, I got to give props to everyone who was there. There was a lot of people really helping, like Doctors Without Border. They set up the big field hospital near Lviv. They were treated a lot of people. We had wall shelter and kitchen there, and they're still there serving food. So it was a lot of good work that was done at that time. But at that time, there was fear in the hearts of Ukrainians, but there was also a hope that this is going to not be a long-term conflict. They were thinking, everybody that at that time, civilians, they were thinking it's going to be like 6 months, 9 months, maybe 3 months, and there's going to be peace treaty, and everybody's going to go back to their lives. So those days, even those internally displaced people who would leave, they were already putting on account they were going to come back home to their houses. And at that time, the aid was available everywhere, right? You can, and a lot of people didn't really go for it as much because they still had savings, stuff like that. And now we are 2.5 years into the war, and a lot of the big multinational nonprofits, they no longer in Ukraine. They moved somewhere else. But a need has increased dramatically because people, regular civilians, they have lost all savings they had. Just to give you an idea, that's how I grew up, and that's how a lot of families in Ukraine, they used to, store during the harvest time. They would store like potatoes, vegetables. They would can things. They would put them in the basements and store them for winter. Sometimes you would have enough supplies to last you for a couple of years. If it's a hard times, you don't have to go to the store. You just go to the basement and get like one of the canned pickled stuff, and you can eat, simple meal. So right now, 2.5 years, most of these supplies of the regular civilians is done. So how they say, after war, famine comes. And that's what we see right now. So basically, Ukraine before the war was a breadbasket of Europe. Now Ukraine has become beggars of the world because of agriculture has been destructed heavily in Ukraine. A lot of fields that would be cultivated right now, they're full of mines. So there's no crops can be grown there, right? So you're talking about huge, especially like south part, like Kherson region, right? I mean, that used to be one of the most fruitful land that we used to cultivate. Now it's basically you cannot do anything there. So, I was just looking at the news like last week. So the price of potatoes has increased 200% since last year in Ukraine, and it's going to be going up and up. So basically, but the work is not available, the jobs is not available, the pensions, people who live on a pension, the minimum pension is like $150 a month. So it's really hard for the folks to survive. So that's why for us as organizations that's on the ground there now, basically we have to do what we've been doing in 2022. Plus, we need to pick up the slack from everyone who already left, try to serve those people. So our main goal right now is to provide, because our main mission is to serve the food kits. We provide about 1,500 food kits each week to families. But it's like, we can go through the truck of supplies in a matter of 2 hours. If you pull up the truck and you put in the middle of any city, it's going to be a line. So it's a very challenging, but I'm staying hopeful that we can ride through this, and the better days ahead.
Okay, that's a lot of that's a big support. I mean, 1,500 families a week. That's not a light number. You're doing a lot of work down there. Now, let me go to the aid kits and the aid packages you just mentioned. I mean, people donate because they're assuming and they're hoping, just like you said, somebody like Yuriy is out there who is handing these 1,500 kits to 1,500 families. But recently, not so recently, I mean, it's always been there, but recently I saw on the news some propaganda and disinformation. And I call it disinformation because for me, the linguistic difference between misinformation and disinformation is simple. Misinformation is an error in informing people about something. For me, disinformation is when you have intent, when you intentionally cause propaganda, when you intentionally know that this message is not true, but you still share it, you still amplify it, and you still stand to discuss with it. And I think, there's a lot of this going around, this disinformation about aid packages by the US, which are in the tens of billions every time you see it in the news. And then comes Yuriy and says, please donate $20. And, a lot of people say, what? I just gave you $75 billion of tax money. And a few months before that, I gave you $60 billion. And a few months before that, I gave you another something and something in the billions. How dare you ask me for $20? And that's a reality of a lot of people. A lot of people don't know what's going on, where the money's going. So what is happening? Why is Hope for Ukraine not seeing $100 million of that $75 billion?
Because the money that U.S. government has allocated. So I think so far, last time I checked, I think since the full scale was about $170 billion that U.S. has been given to Ukraine through these aid packages. But I think the whole labeling of this as a Ukrainian aid packages is wrong, because it has to be split in two. Because outside of that sum, only about 10% goes to economic support. So basically about 10% of what U.S. government is giving to Ukraine goes to Ukraine to help pay for pensions, help pay for first responders, help paying for salaries for military, for soldiers and stuff like that. So it's about 10% of everything is being approved by Congress, right? And 90% stays in United States. So to be fair, the whole package should be split with two labels. Okay, 10% should be labeled as aid package to Ukraine. The other should be labeled as a stimulus package for defense industry of the United States of America. And because Washington Post did a great piece about this, and to look where the money, that 90% actually goes. So, and that 90%, about 31 states in United States, the arm producers are benefiting from these aid packages that have been approved. So if you look at the places like Scranton, Pennsylvania, where they make missiles 415 millimeter artillery machines, right? You look places like Lima, Ohio. Lima, Ohio, this is where they make Abrams tanks and Strykers. You look at places like Missouri, Texas. So all these big defense corporations are getting these huge contracts from U.S. government and Pentagon, right, to make new weapons. Because what Ukraine gets is the stockpiles of weapons that's already been in the warehouses in the United States. A lot of them are already outdated. Also, some of them, they would have to be destroyed, utilized, and the U.S. would have to pay money to utilize them, right? And they basically, every time the Congress approves that, the old stock goes to Ukraine, so we fight Russians, and these manufacturers in U.S. get all these contracts to produce new weapons to refill those warehouses. So what that's been doing to U.S. economy, there's always talk about let's bring manufacturing back into U.S. Let's start making stuff in U.S. Let's create blue-collar jobs, right? Let's not, send money to China or whatever, That's this package, this aid package to Ukraine. This has been doing exactly that. Just to give an example, right? Scranton, Pennsylvania, right? Last year, that particular factory, they were making about 15,000 artillery ammunition a month. Now, because of this latest aid package, that has been increased to over 100,000 a month. What that means is new jobs for that particular community, right? Before the Ukraine war, those plants, they barely worked, Now some of them work in 3 shifts. So there's high-paying jobs that local communities get to apply for, right? So it's been great, right? If you go to places like Lima, Ohio, or you go to places like Scranton and you talk to some of these workers, like, do you want Ukraine funding to be cut? They definitely not gonna like that, because that's their bread and butter, right? So that's basically it's been, and you can check it for yourself. Look at the stock price of General Dynamics. Look at that stock price before the war in Ukraine.
Naturally,
and now, right? Because of all that money they start gaining, right? Plus, on top of that, it's been very good for U.S. business because, for example, you look at Poland. Poland gave all this old Soviet equipment, tanks, helicopters, some planes, to Ukraine when the war just started. But in return, they signed a multi-billion-dollar contracts with U.S. to buy newer equipment. And all these European countries, right? Whether it's Poland, you're talking about Finland, Denmark. So they given those F-16s to Ukraine, donating. But in return, U.S. getting multi-billion-dollar contracts to supply F-35s. So as far as the new business, I'm not even talking about the new business that U.S. defense industry is getting from European countries. If you put it all together, it's probably almost the same as what they call the aid package that they've been given to Ukraine, which most of it stays in United States. So that's basically how you got to look at it. And also this has been done to U.S. is reinvented the defense industry, right? Some of the stuff have been not produced since 2005, for example, because some of the weapons that they start producing now, those lines have been completely dormant because, U.S. has been fighting these wars with with enemies, they don't have planes and stuff like that, right? So they didn't have a need to produce that type of equipment. So now, technology is going. They get more advanced, and they these dormant lines on plants like in Arizona, in Tucson, Arizona, they open up these new plants to produce this new equipment. So it's in the long run, I think. Of course, Ukraine is paying the ultimate price, right? Because we lose lives every day, and life is more precious than $170 billion.
Not
In
to
my opinion.
capitalism. To
Yeah, no,
capitalism, life is not. That's the reality we're seeing. That's
yeah,
what you're explaining. You're explaining that the reality is life is not worth a dollar, but the hope is that we get to a point where we realize that life is worth more than money. And I
yeah,
think that's been something historic forever now. For a
yeah,
couple of hundred
yeah.
years at least.
But yeah. So that's the thing is, but the problem is you got to understand that since 2022, Russia has pumped billions of dollars
Mm.
into different media outlets in the West. So they push that narrative, right? They push that narrative basically, and that's how right now the whole war in Ukraine becomes so politicized, right?
Mhm.
So basically, it's not more a humanitarian
Right.
issue that we looked at in 2022. Now it's whose side you on,
Yes.
you blue or you red,
Yes.
and that's sad because in the end of the day, what Ukraine is doing right now is holding off this big, huge invasion on democracy. And if Ukraine gonna fall, then U.S. troops will have to be on the ground in Europe, and
Now,
that's the reality.
so going to that, first of all, you're right. I think polarization is part of how you get these things politicized. If you were going to put a narrative out in any kind of media that this isn't right, people are dying, let's just sit at a table and discuss and figure it out, you're not going to have war. You're not going to have all this business. And I relate completely to what you said because I used to, I used to be in the trading world, and I had a fund to run. And speaking of war, gold is very directly correlated to war. And when I'd invest in gold heavily, a part of me, the human says, "Oh my God, people are dying." But another part of me, the capitalist, turns around and says, I wish more people die so that there's more fear, so that I wish the war expands so there's more fear, so that my gold goes up in price. It's, at $900 an ounce, and I really needed to get to $1,200 an ounce, and one good missile will make that happen. And so that's how you start thinking as a capitalist. You start thinking, how can I make money off of this? And like you said, look at the stock prices of this place and that. And people follow those things. They see the news, they see the aid packages go out, they see all of these metrics come out, and basically they put their money based on how intelligently they think they're reading this information and how the markets will react to it. So it's very, very unfortunate. I think it's despicable that we think that way in the first place. And now, to the point you made at the end, you said, if Ukraine should fall, it's going to get worse. Now, a lot of people are in the belief that Russia won't stop at Ukraine. I've heard comparisons to Nazi Germany prior to World War II. But I'd like to hear how this connects, because for Hitler, he sought to overcome issues he believed extended even beyond Europe. It wasn't just Europe. He had issues that were on a social level, essentially. It wasn't just about land. It wasn't him saying, oh, Germany is owed some money by Europe, we're going to fight until we get that money. Or, Poland should be part of Germany, so I want it back. It wasn't like that. It was very it was very cultural, social, ethical from his perspective. And now, is there, for Russia, it seems that the issue is control power of where Ukraine sits strategically to Russia, for example, and to return this puppet country as it was before the change to true democracy into that space, because there are countries in the region that are exactly as you say, compliant to Moscow's orders. And I think Moscow wants to have Ukraine back in that seat. And Ukraine says, no, we're a democracy, we're free, we make our own decisions and what's best for us, and we don't want to be in that seat. How does this conversation provide an implied connection to concern the world or even Europe from a viewpoint of Putin or Moscow having personal interest in, for example, expanding into France?
You always have to, dictators always announce what they're going to do. And if you go back to December 2021, and if you look at the document that Putin sent to NATO and United States, right, about expansion of NATO, right? And that was his move before invading Ukraine, right? And if you read through the document, right, so outside of like NATO not moving into Ukraine, and not supplying weapons to Ukraine, that was one part. But another part, every country that joined NATO starting from 1997, right? You're talking about Poland, Czech Republic, Baltic states. NATO should not expand to these countries. U.S. has to, and NATO had to move all the weapons from there, and basically back to prior to 1997. So at that time, he already set the rule. He said, for me, Ukraine is not enough. The battlefield is going to take place on Ukrainian soil, but my sight are back before the Iron Wall, right? Remember, there was a half of the Germany that was a sphere of influence of Soviet Union, and that's how the sick man Putin thinks, because he feels, and that's the reason why he always pronounces and advertises what he's going to do. And then basically U.S. came back at that time in December and January. They said, your demands is not something we will comply with. And February 2022 took place, right? And if Ukraine would fall in 3 days, or 7 days, like most of the Western, intelligent people were predicting at that time, I believe right now we would be talking about Poland, Baltic states at this time. The reason why Putin has not moved further, because Ukraine stood and they fought. And they fought so hard for 2.5 years that at this point, in order for Russian army to move to more west and try to capture, it's going to take them, 5-6 years to recoup, because the amount of people, the amount of soldiers that's been dead, the amount of equipment that's been destroyed on Ukrainian soil. So Ukraine right now is the wall that is preventing from a wet dream of Putin to come to reality, because in his mind, and if you look at his interview, I don't know if you watched it with Tucker Carlson, in his mind, he thinks he's like a doctor of history. For him, Ukraine does not exist as an independent country. He always calls we are one nation, right? So basically, that falls exactly with the same, kind of narrative that Hitler had, right? So everyone had to fall into his ideology, right? If you don't fall into his whatever, mold that he created, you would be destroyed. Same thing with him. He feels like some supernatural power gave him a mission on this earth to reestablish Soviet Union, and he wants to rewrite the history, right? And no matter what, so right now the reason why he's stuck is because of the fight that Ukraine put up, and because of the Western support. That's why we are only talking about Ukraine. We're not talking about Western, and that's why this is very important. That's why I believe that what's going on in Ukraine is far beyond Ukraine. So that's
So,
my thoughts on it.
so your perspective to tie it to World War II is kind of like, imagine Poland didn't fall so quickly in World War II, and if Poland was able to fight for 3 years, it may have exhausted Nazis, Germany's strength, and then we would be in a completely different narrative right now before everything even started, and that is where it's going now. My concern is also, I find a lot of the support for Ukraine and a lot of the narrative around this in terms of a positive feedback to Ukraine is the fear of personal interests. It's not about Ukraine. It's about what happens after Ukraine if we don't help. Not a lot of countries are there saying, oh, we should uphold democracy. We should uphold sovereignty. We should keep our contracts and, our agreements civil. If there was a promissory note, I think, from Moscow to the West, to the rest of the world, that we only want Ukraine. That's all we want. I think everybody would say, here you go, take it. They wouldn't interfere. They would say, take it, enjoy it, nobody cares. But the problem is, like you said, Moscow may not be satisfied with only Ukraine. And because all the other countries are thinking, it may be that I'm next, that's why they're saying, I'd rather sacrifice a Ukrainian than my own people. I'd rather the minefields happen in Ukraine than my own country. And that's how a lot of wars are defended. There are several conflicts around the world right now where the strongest arms of these conflicts are not actually involved physically or geographically, but they're involved in the influence of their technology, their money, and their intelligence. So it's really sad for me that the conflict itself is not enough to interfere. It has to do with, again, to me, opportunistic reasons or personal security reasons, which all fall under this umbrella of a capitalist, selfish perspective of, hey, I need to make sure I'm okay and let the other person die if it has to be. There's always this segregation of people instead of, coming together for this. Now, I went through, this first bit of our conversation, our dialogue, so that I can set the stage for what is happening there from a lot of different ways about the narrative of what's going on, so that the next time somebody in New Jersey or New York or LA says, "Oh, why am I helping Ukraine?" Based on what you said, when we think about 170 billion and we think about 10%, that's 17 billion, and we think about 2 years, that's 8.5 billion each year to a country to manage all its infrastructure, people should start putting that number. People should start, and it's, over 2.5 years now, people should start putting in about $7 billion a year into a country and seeing if they can manage to have a properly managed and run country and organized and paying everything properly with $7 billion before they think, should I help or shouldn't I help? Right. That's sure. What I'm taking from this. Now, hope for Ukraine. How are you responding to the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine? In the sense of, you touched on the family kits, but what do you exactly do down there? So that people understand, when they're coming to you, what is it that you do?
I mean, we are in the full emergency response every day of the week, right? So I would never think that we're still going to be doing that 2.5 years. My thought will be that we will be in the rebuilding stage at this point, but because of the situation on the ground, that's what we have to keep on doing, right? So our main program is, what's called family support project. So basically, we supply these food kits, we supply hygiene products, and all other stuff to different areas, especially the frontline towns. So the way it works, we ship containers either from here or other parts of Europe, comes to our warehouse in Lviv, Ukraine. It gets sorted out, packed together, and then we have volunteers from different parts, different partners that we work with. They come each day, about 2 to 3 vans. They load up these food kits. They serve the areas where they serve, and they report back to us. As soon as they distribute that, they report back to us where this food kits went, who's been served, the number of people been served, and then we broadcast that to our donors and constituents. Because I believe that lifeline of every relationship is communication. Once the communication is broken, the relationship fall apart. And that's how I run Hope for Ukraine. I want to make sure that our donors, everyone we follow us, they know exactly which area of Ukraine we work, what we're doing there each and every day. On our social media, we do daily, twice a day posts about daily updates on what we do on our website to make sure that everybody knows exactly where the money goes. Because I believe for the nonprofits, transparency and efficiency and time of response is very important, right? So I don't want to do something that's gonna touch someone 6 months down the line. So we had, for example, one particular donor, right? They gave us $10,000, and they said to us, "Okay, we want this to be used toward your food program." So we took the $10,000, and it took us 10 days. We went and we bought instant noodle meals in Poland, a truck full of them. We brought them to Ukraine. We got a package, and we had volunteering groups start picking up these food kits, right, that contain those particular items, bringing to frontline towns in a matter of 10 days. And that's basically, that's how we work. So outside of our food program, we also run internal display center in Lviv, Ukraine, where we take in folks who run from the frontline areas. We place them there, and we find them permanent home to live. So since the start of full-scale war, about 3,000 folks went through those doors. And we also have a large educational program for kids, after-school programs for kids of war, because a lot of the children in Ukraine are raised by single moms right now, because most of the male population are enlisted in the army, and a lot of folks who come back home, they injured and stuff like that. Just to give you an idea, right now in Ukraine, there's about 70 to 80,000 amputees because of war. And just to put that in perspective, France, which is the population is twice the size of Ukraine, they have about 20,000 amputees in the whole country. But that's what happens. So basically, you have a big humanitarian needs that needs to be tackled every day. And that's why we work every day with all our people on the ground to make sure we are most efficient as we can, to serve as many people as we can.
That's really difficult. You built a nonprofit with a name to transparency and efficiency, maximizing donation impact for those you serve in Ukraine. The goal you set is for every donated dollar to basically reach Ukraine, at the highest value of that. You said 90% or even more. How are you achieving this efficiency? And I want you to speak not to me here, but to two audiences. One, the donor, because my goal with this is really humanitarian. At the end of the day, I personally have given up on the political talk because I think it requires a really awakened and educated public to be able to sort political issues. And I think the world today is not in that space to be able to do that collectively. But I do believe that from a humanitarian perspective, we are able, and we still do have that little bit of compassion as humans to be able to support and help. So please speak to two audiences. One, the donor, on how bringing money to Hope for Ukraine and handing that money over to your hands effectively can, we can prove to them that the money is reaching the front lines and helping these people. When you say these things, it opens a new perspective to remember that many mothers are raising children without support. There are many families who have had their lands decimated. There's agricultural problems. There's inflation at a ridiculous rate. For those comfortable enough who can donate, whether it's $5 or $50,000, there needs to be, they need to have some trust, like you said, in reaching that. And on the other side, the other audience is the nonprofits, because I really like two things you said. One, the efficiency and transparency, it's key. And two, you said you hope you're not doing this 2 years down the line. And I think that's very noble of you, because I say this, I think, too often. A lot of organizations, they kind of advertise the fact that they've been in business for 100 years or 80 years. And to me, that's really sad, because it means, in all of those generational eras that you've been in business, you weren't able to solve the problem. You're just taking money, and there's so much inefficiency and there's so much lack of control over the obstacles that you face that you can't really do anything about it. You're just taking some money, feeding yourself, and trickling what's left to whatever cause you're doing, so that you have enough media and pictures to show the world that you're there, you're doing something. You have a volunteer wearing your shirt or something with your logo, and you put it on your website. That's not charity. That's not philanthropy. That's not help. That's not aid. That's not support. That's you using the problem to earn an income, right? And I really want nonprofits to change that model, like what you're doing. So speak to those two.
Yeah, so again, Hope for Ukraine started as fully volunteered organization. Just to give you an idea that myself, I start making salary out of this only in 2023. So my whole goal was always to utilize as many volunteers as possible. And the reason why we've been successful, and I call ourselves a skinny nonprofit, because our $1 is probably like $10 or $20 somewhere else, right? Trying to stretch every dollar as much as we can, because since 2016 we built a lot of alliances with these partners, right, from all over Ukraine, that basically work. Their mission as far as serving people aligns with ours, and they basically using supplies that we deliver there to serve people. So basically, they don't have to be paid, because they doing what we need to do. So we keep overhead very low, right? And when we're talking about the cost, it's all about keeping down the cost. If you keep down the cost, you help more people, right? Because our food kit, right? The cost is about $25 to get everything inside and get this delivered to people who need it. So if you break down, about $20 is ingredients and go inside. $5 is transportation and getting it to where people need it, right? But you can also do the $25 food kit. It can cost $250, right? If you include all the waste, right? And I've seen that firsthand. I've seen folks coming into Ukraine. They do 10 days training seminars. bring all these volunteers. They ran hotel rooms. They described to them, okay, this is how you hand out the food kit. This is how you application to this, that, and that. So, by the time anybody goes do anything, there's a lot of overhead already spent. So the cost of that food kit that's going to be handed out is probably tripled and quadrupled by that time, right? So we're trying to cut down waste as much as we can. So the way we do this is that, everyone who works with us, all the partners, right? Unless you give us reporting, if we give you 2 tons of aid, and you haven't given us proper reporting that we require, you won't get another load of aid. So basically, on a daily basis, and we're in the process of, because we're using technology to regulate everything, right? So right now we have a bot inside of the Telegram where people report the partners every day. So I wake up every day, I know exactly, how many people have been served, where they went, who was served, and we have pictures and videos to prove that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then and also how the donors will know. If you go to our social media, our social media accounts has been attacked crazy by all kinds of actors, So we've been shut down, hacked like 3 times already since the war started. But in our social media and our website, we do daily. And if you go back in the history, since 2022, every day we have 2 to 3 posts every day, where people know exactly which region we served. So you can actually track, if you count and you look through the pictures and you want to count these bags and people they served, you can come up with the numbers that I'm talking about here. So, and we're in the process of building an app, right? There's going to be like a DoorDash for humanitarian aid. So basically, the way it's supposed to launch in Q1 of next year. So it's going to work as, all the people we serve right now, we let them know through like emails and other. They would download the app. They would put a request for the aid. Let's say I'm in Kherson region. That comes to us. We collect information to make sure they're legit. They really need help, because everyone who we hand the bag, they need to submit paperwork, because that's Ukraine government requirements. Just to give you an idea, Ukraine government has placed this new law last year, where every humanitarian law that comes to the country have to be distributed within 90 days. And then we need to report. So let's say we brought 20 tons of humanitarian aid. Within 90 days, we need to report back to Ukraine government what we did with that aid. So there's a lot of reporting that has to be done, and in order to satisfy all these requirements, we need to collect information from the folks we serve. Who you are, why did you get the bag of this and that. So that app will basically utilize technology. So we send they request the aid. We connect them with a local partner who work there. They set up that's how we trying to keep the cost down, to utilize the technology, and also have a process in place where everybody plays by the same rules. You want to work with us, you go, you register, you submit the proof that you're a legit organization, and then you follow the process. Another thing is, we've been accredited by all of the rating agencies that there are in the nonprofit space, right? So BBB, Wise Giving Alliance, they accredit us. That's one of the highest rating agency that look at the nonprofits. They go in and they look the way we conduct the business, the way we fundraise. And, just to give you an idea, in the United States, about 2 million nonprofits. And, BBB accreditation, I think they have 40,000 that are accredited by them. So the standard. So that's a third party that has nothing to do. They accredited hopefully, and then Charity Navigator, right? We have 4 stars with them, 100%. So these are things that were these things they took our 990 and they look the way we conduct the business. So that's basically that's basically when I gave myself. That's the kind of ingredients I look inside of each charity to see if my money really going to go where they're supposed to go.
Now, listening to that, and with all the information you provide on your website and all the accreditation and all the work you're doing and the way you're functioning, obviously at Compassiviste Foundation is a huge part of what we do, and we're always looking everywhere to help and support and amplify and really essentially help how we can. And that's why we're having this conversation. This conversation is happening not really to fill another podcast episode just to get YouTube ratings. It's happening because we want the audience from your side who's listening to this, my audience who's listening to this, to come together and say, okay, I understand the need. I do want to be a part of helping in a humanitarian way. And I do want to be a part of possibly even being involved to stop this conflict. So I can tell the audience, go to Hope for Ukraine and donate. I can tell the audience, go directly there and donate because it's helping in a humanitarian way for people who need that. And, it's not a choosing sides thing. I have friends who are Russian who are helping Ukraine in a humanitarian way. So it's really helping another human. I can do that myself. What more and what beyond this message would you like to share with the audience in the sense of what message do you think is necessary to share with people to help end this conflict? Because continuing to raise donations. I mean, I hope one day, Mackenzie Scott hears this and she says, here's $1 billion to help, right? Great. But how long are we going to do this? Are we going to do this for another 50 years and two generations of people just die and get amputated for no reason? And all the trauma, all the children growing in these conditions. I mean, I look around at my generation and my Ukrainian friends, and a lot of them were literally a year or two when I'd met them, immigrated to New York or to Toronto, where I was living, and they worked really hard. They put themselves through school. They're active people. They are leaders in their communities in many ways, and so it's really sad that this is happening and that all of this talent, all of this potential, all of this growth is going to waste because the narrative has been shifted so much. So how do we engage with you and how do we support so that this narrative can come to an end?
I mean, we have to do what we can as far as the nonprofit, right? We need to respond to the need on the ground. And the reason why we need to help is because right now, based on the last UN stats, about 40% of Ukrainian population that's still in Ukraine needs humanitarian aid. Right? So the situation there is really bad as far as on a human level, right? I'm talking about basic stuff, As far as how we can end this war, I mean, I don't have a good answer for you. This will end when Putin is dead. That's the only way Ukraine will have peace, because as long as he's alive, right, he will keep on fighting. He might take a break because his whole existence is surrounded around that, right? So that's basically it's a sad, because it's very easy to finish this conflict, this war. All they have to do is withdraw their troops from Ukraine. That's it, and it'll be over in one day. The reason why we cannot, and I keep explaining this to people, is okay, we can sign the peace treaty right now, right? But it's going to be the same as happened in 2014. It was a peace treaty, Minsk agreement, right? Sort of, and then they regained and they start attacking. We signed the peace treaty now. They're going to take a break, regroup, and they will hit again in 5-6 years from now. Until he's alive, he's not going to let Ukraine that has a democratic point of view to exist, right? He was fine when there was a presidents who were aligned to him, right, who were his puppets. Once Ukraine shifted west and they said, you know what, we don't want to go back to Soviet Union days. We don't want to live in oppression. We want to live a free, and we want to determine who we are as a country, right, and build alliances with countries and people like us, right? As long as Ukraine has their sights set on West, he's not gonna let it be. So that's basically the sad reality. So I don't really know when this is gonna end. It's really hard to say because I think active combat is still gonna be here for next 3 years, in my opinion.
I recently wrote something basically, for the conflict in Gaza, and I said, put your guns down. If we collectively just put our guns down, there is no tyranny that oppresses us if we choose to act on our own morality and ethics. If we put our guns down all together at once, there's nobody shooting, everything stops. The diplomacy has to take over from that point. But like I said before, it's a matter of that action of put your guns down. That is where the problem happens because we are not collectively at that space. I mean, my hope is that this ends and that we can recover, rebuild, and there should be more serious conversations that we should have. I don't want to be speaking with you about this. I'd rather be speaking with you about, in a world of climate change and disasters, just like what's going on, in the U.S. right now on the East Coast, on the, with the hurricanes and everything. How can we boost Ukraine's ability agriculturally so that it can at least feed people, because we're losing food every day. People don't realize this. Through all of these scenarios, we are losing a lot of food. We're going to go into hunger mode. The last thing we need is to have minefields in our farmlands on top of these issues. So yeah, it's a disaster. So I don't know when people are going to wake up to this kind of narrative, when people are going to wake up to say, I need that farm. That farm is not worth the money that is being used for whatever countries in the world to manufacture weapons, sell the weapon, donate the weapon, whatever they're doing business-wise. That piece of land that can give me potatoes is worth my life, because I can sustain with potatoes. I cannot eat a missile. I cannot eat a dollar bill, but I can eat the potato. So that's my hope.
That's what we're working for. That's why we got to keep on having these type of conversations to hopefully, break through and end this nonsense. Because listen, nobody wants war. The war is the worst disaster that humans can face. Because I can see the firsthand.
Yes.
What it's done to Ukraine is just devastating. So that's something we all have to work toward, peace. But it takes two to tangle, right? You cannot have one side put down the arms while another one put a bullet in your head. So unless there is a reasoning on the other side, right? This other side has to have a drive for peace as well. That's the only way. So that's what we have to hope and pray for, that both sides, because everybody's tired of this. Ukraine's tired. The world is tired. Nobody wants to be involved in these conflicts no more.
But unfortunately, again, as you said, many people benefit from conflict. So sometimes it seems to me that the voices of these people benefiting is really just overwhelming any other voice for peace, compassion, humanity, or anything else. I mean, it's just not factoring in. And I really want people to at least, show support for the peace from any angle you come from. I often say this to people about conflict zones. I say, I know you're an animal rights activist. You love animals. You're always there trying to protect animals. Do you know how many animals die in war? Because we don't record that. We don't mention it. I mean, a whole farm of livestock, a whole wildlife ecosystem gets decimated. It's no longer in existence, right? Like a whole bird population is no longer in that forest, but nobody talks about that. People just say, 7,300 people died during this month of the war, and it stops there. And I tell people, come in with what your drive is. Come in with your passion. Come into the support for ending this war from that existence, and bring all your money to Yuriy because he's doing good work at Ukraine. And I think if we follow this kind of grassroots, boots on the ground systems of people who are established in their places, that's how we get the maximum efficiency out of the system. And with fully transparent organizations, that's where you're doing the most help with your money. So, Hope for Ukraine is where it is. My last question is simple. How do people go to Hope for Ukraine? How do they reach you? How do they contact you? We're going to post all of your information down here, but let everybody know what's the best way to reach Yuriy.
Yeah, you can reach us best on our website, hfu.org, stands for hopeforukraine.org. hfu.org. Also, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, X, all those platforms. So Hope for Ukraine. So you can reach out to us, learn what we do, and get involved in any way you can. Volunteer, donate in kind food, donate canned food, whatever you can. We live by motto: there is no such thing as a small donation. Everyone who, because I think the world's going to get a better place if more people get involved in acts of kindness. Because I think personally, if you want to live long, you have to practice acts of kindness every day. Because I know by myself, coming from business world and getting involved in this, me myself, I'm much happier now, much healthier. You can track the healthiness. Everybody wants to be healthy. Get involved in acts of kindness. Whatever you're passionate about, do something for free someone every day, and you'll see how you're gonna feel much better and on the inside.
This is very true. And you speak as a true compassiviste, because that's what compassiviste stands for, the compassionate activist. It's the person who's acting based on compassion, on passion, and essentially trying to find joy in the acts of kindness that they act out. So you fall right into that description. Thank you, Yuriy, for speaking on Compassiviste Dialogues. And thank you for the education, the explanations, and the perspectives, especially to all of this disinformation that goes around that causes issues, I believe. The only way to debunk disinformation is through education. So thank you for coming here and speaking to all of that. To our audience, please subscribe to our Compassiviste Dialogue channel and share this episode specifically so we can do as much as we can to bring peace to a world that really needs it now in all the conflicts. Follow us on our social media. All links to Yuriy Boyechko, Compassiviste Foundation, Hope for Ukraine, and Compassiviste are listed below. Hope for Ukraine, support humanitarian work that they do. We're here to help change the world together. I'm Ali Horia.